The gym was my penance. A temple of self-flagellation where I paid for the sin of being soft in a world that demanded hardness. For years, my body had been a stranger's house I was forced to inhabit, one whose architecture I found fundamentally disappointing. I moved through it with a kind of detached resignation, feeding it, clothing it, but never truly living in it. The decision to join a gym wasn't born of inspiration, but of a quiet, gnawing desperation that had finally chewed through my apathy. It was the last resort of a man who had run out of excuses. I chose the grittiest, least glamorous place I could find. A warehouse-style box called Iron Haven that smelled perpetually of chalk, sweat, and rust. There were no juice bars, no yoga studios with panoramic windows. Just unforgiving fluorescent lights, groaning machines, and acres of cold, hard iron. It was perfect. A place to punish myself into a shape I could tolerate, away from the prying eyes of the polished and the perfect. And then there was Alex. He was one of the trainers. I noticed him on my first day, a figure of casual competence moving through the chaos. He wasn't a bodybuilder, not in the cartoonish, vein-popped way of the guys who grunted in the squat racks. He was built more like a carpenter or a stonemason, broad-shouldered, with a solid, functional strength that was evident in the way he moved, the way he effortlessly re-racked a formidable stack of plates someone had abandoned. He had dark, unruly hair that fell over his brow, and a calm, steady presence that seemed to carve out a pocket of quiet around him. My free introductory session, a mandatory part of the membership, landed me with him. I had been hoping for the wiry, over-caffeinated kid who looked like he survived on protein powder and anxiety. Instead, I got the quiet storm. "Leo," he'd said, his voice a low, unassuming rumble that cut through the clang of metal. He extended a hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused and warm. It was a working man's hand. "I'm Alex. I'll be showing you the ropes today." His eyes, a deep, ambiguous brown, held mine for a fraction of a second too long. It wasn't a challenge, not exactly. It was an assessment, a quiet taking of stock that made me feel intensely, uncomfortably seen. In that moment, I felt the familiar urge to shrink, to become smaller, to apologize for the space I occupied. "Right, Leo," I managed, my voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison to his. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "All right, Leo, let's see what we're working with." That first session was a blur of polite torture. He was patient, his instructions clear and concise. He never condescended, never made me feel weak, even as my muscles screamed in protest at being woken from a years-long slumber. The most unsettling part was his proximity. To correct my form on a row, he placed a hand flat on my back, between my shoulder blades. The warmth of his palms soaked through my thin t-shirt, a point of focused heat that sent a jolt straight down my spine. "Keep your back straight," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. "Pull with your lats, not your arms." I could smell him then. Not cologne, but something clean and elemental. Soap, faint laundry detergent, and the honest scent of a body at work. My heart hammered against my ribs for a reason that had nothing to do with physical exertion. I gritted my teeth and pulled, focusing on the burn in my muscles as a way to drown out the sudden, roaring awareness of the man standing beside me. I signed up for a block of sessions with him. It was a foolish, extravagant expense. But as I walked out of the gym that day, muscles trembling, I knew I would have paid double. It wasn't about the fitness anymore. It was about that steady gaze, that quiet voice, and the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being seen. I was paying for an hour of his attention, a commodity I hadn't realized I was starving for. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Twice a week, I would enter the metallic-smelling sanctuary of Iron Haven and submit myself to Alex's quiet command. The rest of the week, I came on my own, dutifully following the program he'd written out for me on a crisp white sheet of paper. During those solo sessions, I became an observer, a student of Alex. I watched him with other clients. He had a different mode for each of them. With Mrs. Gable, an octogenarian with a titanium hip and a will of iron, he was endlessly gentle, his voice soft, his movements slow and deliberate as he guided her through her exercises. He'd laugh with her, a deep, genuine sound that made the lines around his eyes crinkle. With a young, cocky athlete trying to bulk up, he was firm, no nonsense, pushing him to his limit with a series of clipped, encouraging barks. He was a chameleon of competence, adapting his energy to fit the person in front of him. I found myself wondering, with a persistent, anxious curiosity, what his mode was for me. He was always calm, always professional. But there were moments, tiny fissures in his professional facade, that I collected and obsessed over in the quiet of my apartment. There was the time I was struggling with the last rep of a bench press, the bar stalling halfway up, my arms shaking violently. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not impatience, but intense focus. His hands hovered just inches from the bar, ready to intervene, but he didn't. "You've got this, Leo," he said, his voice a low, resonant anchor. "Breathe. Push," and somehow I did. The bar went up. As I re-racked it with a loud clang, gasping for air, he simply nodded. "Good work." The approval in those two words felt more satisfying than any praise I had ever received. Then there were the touches. They were always clinical, always justified by the context of training. A hand on my lower back to correct my posture during a deadlift. Fingers lightly tapping my tricep to remind me which muscle to engage. His thumb brushing against my wrist as he checked my pulse. Each touch was a small firework under my skin, leaving a phantom warmth that lingered long after he'd moved away. I began to catalog them, to analyze them with the obsessive precision of a detective examining clues. The duration of the touch, the pressure, the exact placement. My internal monologue was a frantic, looping commentary. Did he have to leave his hand there for that long? Was that just an accident, his knee brushing mine as he sat on the bench next to me? Does he do this with everyone? I watched. He didn't. Not in the same way. With others, his corrections were quick, efficient taps. With me, his hands sometimes seemed to linger, a steadying pressure that felt less like an instruction and more like an assurance. Or maybe I was just projecting my own desperate yearning onto these meaningless interactions. That was the more likely explanation. I was a man dying of thirst in a desert, seeing an oasis in every heat shimmer. Alex was just a good trainer. That's all it was. And yet, I found myself noticing things. The way his focus would sometimes drift during a session with another client. His eyes finding me across the gym for a brief, unreadable moment. The way he'd appear by my side when I was on my own, offering an unsolicited tip or a quiet word of encouragement before moving on. He seemed to have an internal radar for my presence, an awareness of where I was and what I was doing, even in the crowded, noisy space. One Thursday evening, the gym was unusually quiet. A heavy, unseasonable rainstorm had descended upon the city, and only the most dedicated members had ventured out. It was just me, Alex, and a handful of others scattered across the vast floor. My session had ended 10 minutes ago, but I was lingering, stretching on a mat in the corner, unwilling to break the spell of the quiet and go back out into the wet, lonely night. Alex was at the front desk, finishing up his paperwork. I watched the methodical movement of his pen, the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead. He finished, capped the pen, and stretched, his back arching in a way that made the fabric of his gray t-shirt pull taut across his chest and shoulders. He looked tired. He glanced over and saw me watching. I quickly looked down at the mat, my face flushing with heat, embarrassed at being caught in my silent surveillance. I expected him to just wave and head for the locker room. Instead, I heard the soft squeak of his trainers on the rubber floor approaching me. "Late night for you," he said, his voice low in the relative silence. I shrugged, still not meeting his eyes. "Just finishing up." He sat down on the edge of the mat, not too close, but close enough that I could feel the subtle shift in the air. He smelled of rain and the clean, metallic scent of the gym. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the warehouse roof and the distant hum of a ventilation fan. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable, weighted. "You know," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "I used to be like you." My head snapped up. "Like me?" A small, wry smile touched his lips. All coiled up, scared to take up space, he gestured vaguely at the gym around us. "This place. I didn't start working here because I loved lifting weights. I started working here because I was terrified, hated how I felt, hated how I looked." I stared at him, unable to reconcile the image of the confident, capable man in front of me with the person he was describing. It was like he had reached into my chest and pulled out a secret I thought was mine alone. You? It was all I could manage to say. He nodded, his gaze distant for a second, looking at something I couldn't see. Yeah, me. Took a long time to get comfortable. To feel like my body was on my team, you know? Not something I had to fight against every day. He looked back at me, his eyes clear and direct. You're doing the work, Leo. It's good to see. The sincerity in his voice was a physical blow. It bypassed all my defenses, all the layers of sarcasm and self-deprecation I used to protect myself. It was a moment of pure, unexpected vulnerability, a glimpse behind the curtain of the stoic trainer. He wasn't just seeing my physical progress. He was seeing the war I was waging inside my own head. Thanks, I whispered, the word feeling inadequate. He simply nodded, then pushed himself to his feet. Don't overdo it on the stretching. See you Tuesday. And then he was gone, leaving me on the mat with the sound of the rain and the echo of his confession. Something had shifted between us. The professional boundary had blurred, replaced by the fragile, tentative lines of a shared secret. He wasn't just my trainer anymore. He was someone who understood, and that was infinitely more dangerous. The tipping point came on a bright, cold Tuesday 2 weeks later. The memory of our late-night conversation hung in the air between us, an unspoken acknowledgement that had subtly changed our dynamic. The touches felt less clinical, the silences more charged. I was doing seated dumbbell presses, an exercise I particularly loathed. It put me directly in front of the massive wall of mirrors that lined the free weight area. Mirrors were my enemy. They were unflinching, honest tormentors. They showed me the slump in my shoulders, the soft curve of my stomach, the awkwardness in my own limbs. I hated the person who looked back at me, a pale, uncertain imitation of a man. So, I developed a technique. I would fix my gaze on a point on the wall just over my own reflection, or on the scuff marks on the floor, or on the pattern of the ceiling tiles. Anywhere but at myself. I was on my third set, my arms starting to fatigue, my focus entirely on a water stain on the acoustic tile above me. I was breathing hard, my face contorted with effort. Leo, Alex's voice cut through my concentration. I lowered the weights to my knees, my chest heaving. He was standing in front of me, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. What? I asked, a little too defensively. You're looking at the ceiling. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Just concentrating. I muttered, my eyes darting to the floor. No, you're not, he said, his voice still quiet, but with a new edge of insistence. You do it every time. Curls, presses, anything facing the mirror. You look everywhere but at yourself. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. He'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. He noticed everything. I had no defense, no plausible excuse. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. It's important to watch your form, he continued, his tone softening slightly, as if sensing my panic. To make sure you're aligned. To see the muscles working. It's part of the process. I just shook my head, unable to form words. The idea of intentionally watching myself, of scrutinizing that disappointing reflection, felt like a form of psychological torture I wasn't prepared to endure. He was quiet for a long moment, just watching me. I could feel his gaze on the top of my head. I braced myself for a lecture, for a platitude about self-acceptance, for him to finally give up on me. Instead, he moved. He took a half-step closer, positioning himself directly in my line of sight, blocking my reflection in the mirror. He knelt down slightly, bringing his face level with mine. Here it comes. My brain is a frantic mess, a jumble of panic and something else, something sharp and hopeful and terrifying. I am braced for the inevitable disappointment. Okay, he says, and his voice is a low, intimate thing, a sound meant only for me in this loud, echoing room. Then look at me instead. My breath catches in my throat. Look at me instead. It's not a suggestion. It's a command, an invitation, a lifeline. My eyes, which have been desperately scanning the floor, the scuff on his shoe, the frayed hem of his shorts, slowly, reluctantly, lift to his. And the world shrinks. The clanging weights, the grunts of other lifters, the thumping bass of the gym's sound system, it all fades into a distant, muffled hum. There is only Alex. His eyes are dark and incredibly steady, holding mine with an intensity that feels like a physical touch. There is no pity in them, no judgment, just a calm, unwavering focus. My focus. Pick them up, he says, his gaze never leaving mine. His voice is the only anchor in my spinning universe. My hands, acting on some instinct I don't possess, move to the dumbbells. I lift them back to my shoulders. They feel impossibly heavy. Now press, he commands softly. Watch me. I push. The weight goes up. My arms shake, but my gaze is locked on his. I see the tiny muscles around his eyes tighten in concentration, mirroring my own effort. I see the slight parting of his lips. He breathes in when I push up, out when I lower the weights. He's breathing with me. He's lifting with me. I see nothing but him. I finish the set, and the next. My form is perfect. My movements are strong and controlled. I am not thinking about my weak shoulders or my soft middle. I am not thinking about the stranger in the mirror. I am only thinking about the man in front of me, whose unwavering gaze is somehow rebuilding me from the inside out. When I finally lower the weights for the last time, my whole body is trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. The ambient noise of the gym rushes back in, loud and jarring. Alex is still there, kneeling in front of me, our faces only a foot apart. See, he says, and there's a ghost of a smile on his lips. You're stronger than you think. The subtext of the moment hangs in the air between us, thick and shimmering like heat-off summer asphalt. He isn't just talking about the weights. We both know it. He holds my gaze for one more charged second, then stands up, the spell broken. Good set, he says, his voice back to its normal, professional tone. He claps me lightly on the shoulder, a familiar gesture that now feels entirely different, and walks away to help someone else. I sit there on the bench, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I stare at the space where he just was, my mind reeling. Look at me instead. The words are branded onto my brain. He had offered himself as an alternative to my own self-loathing. He had seen my deepest insecurity and, instead of turning away, had stepped directly into its path. The rest of the week was a study in unresolved tension. Every interaction was loaded with the memory of that moment. When he handed me a water bottle, our fingers brushed, and it felt like an electric shock. When he stood behind me to spot a lift, his presence was an almost unbearable weight of awareness. We didn't talk about it. We didn't have to. It was a new, unspoken language between us, a conversation happening in long looks, in charged silences, in the careful space we maintained between our bodies. The breaking point arrived, as it had to, on a Friday night. It was the end of my session. The gym was emptying out, the evening lights slanting through the high, dusty windows. I was gathering my things, my mind already rehearsing the casual "see you next week" that felt like a lie in my mouth. Leo, I turned. Alex was leaning against the doorframe of his small office, a tiny room with a desk and a filing cabinet. He was watching me with that same steady, unreadable expression. Walk you out, he asked. It was a simple question, but it felt monumental. He'd never done that before. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. We walked in silence through the now quiet gym, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air was cool and still. We stepped out into the parking lot, and the evening air was a welcome shock, smelling of asphalt and the coming night. Most of the cars were gone. My beat-up sedan looked small and lonely under the orange glow of a single security light. We stopped beside my car door. This was it, the end of the line, the point where he would say goodnight, and I would get in my car and drive away and spend my entire weekend dissecting every second of the past week. So, I started, fumbling for my keys, desperate to fill the silence. Have a good weekend. You too, he said, but he didn't move. He just stood there, his hands in the pockets of his hoodie, watching me. The silence descended again, heavier this time, freighted with everything unsaid. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear in the stillness of the parking lot. Why do you do it, Leo? I froze, my hand on the car door handle. Do what? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Why do you try so hard to be invisible? The question was so direct, so gentle, and so utterly devastating. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine inquiry. He wanted to know. He wanted to understand. And in that moment, I was so tired. So tired of hiding, of pretending, of fighting a war inside myself that I was constantly losing. I finally looked at him, really looked at him. In the dim light, his face was all shadows and angles, his expression serious, patient. He was waiting for an honest answer, and I was tired of lying. Because I don't like what I see, I confessed, the words tasting like rust in my mouth. It was the truest thing I had said to anyone in years. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer a cheap platitude. He just nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he already knew. He took a step closer, closing the small, safe distance between us. He was so close now I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the deep, earnest light in his eyes. "I do," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. "I like what I see." And then he was moving, closing the final inch between us. His hand came up, not to my shoulder, not to my back, but to my face. His palm was warm against my cheek, his thumb stroking softly over my jawline. It was the most deliberate, most tender touch I had ever felt. My breath hitched. My entire body went rigid with shock and a sudden, overwhelming surge of hope. This is it. This is real. His eyes searched mine, asking a silent question. I must have given him the answer he was looking for, because he leaned in, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held captive by the warmth of his hand and the promise in his gaze. His lips met mine. It wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft. It was questioning. It was unbelievably gentle. It was just the firm, warm pressure of his mouth against mine, a moment of stunning, breathtaking quiet in the middle of a lonely parking lot. It tasted of nothing but him, clean and honest. It felt right. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. He pulled back after a moment that felt both like a second and a lifetime. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb still stroking my skin. His forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his breath, warm and even, against my lips. "Look at me," he whispered, the words a faint echo of his command from the gym. I opened my eyes, which I hadn't even realized I'd closed. His face was inches from mine, his expression soft, vulnerable, and completely open. The mask of the stoic trainer was gone. In its place was just, "Alex." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just leaned in and kissed him again, a little less tentatively this time, trying to pour every ounce of my silent, pent-up yearning into the simple meeting of our mouths. He responded instantly, his other hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers lacing into my hair, holding me there. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion. It was a kiss of confirmation, of mutual, dawning recognition. The drive home was a fugue state. I don't remember the traffic or the turns. I just remember the phantom feeling of his lips on mine, the warmth of his hand on my face. When I got to my apartment, I sat on my sofa in the dark, replaying the moment over and over again, terrified that if I turned on a light, I would wake up and find it was all a dream. The weekend was agonizing. A long, silent stretch of time filled with a deafening mixture of euphoria and terror. What now? Was that a one-time thing? A moment of pity? A mistake? My mind, my old enemy, spun 1,000 different catastrophic scenarios. By the time Monday rolled around, I had convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing, or at least misinterpreted it. He would be distant, professional. He would regret it. My next session was Tuesday. I walked into the gym feeling like a man walking to his own execution. My stomach was a knot of pure dread. I saw him immediately. He was talking to another trainer by the front desk. He looked up as I walked in, and his eyes met mine across the room. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, his expression giving nothing away. My heart sank. Professional. It was going to be professional. I went to the locker room and changed, my movements slow and heavy. I was an idiot. I had ruined the one good thing I had, the one place I was starting to feel okay. I had mistaken kindness for attraction, and now I had to face the awkward, cringeworthy consequences. When I came out, he was waiting for me by the squat rack. "Ready?" he asked, his voice even. "Yeah," I mumbled, not meeting his eye. The session was excruciating. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. The easy, comfortable silence we had developed was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle quiet. He was all business, his instructions clipped, his corrections swift and impersonal. The lingering touches were gone. He kept a careful, deliberate distance. Every minute was a fresh turn of the screw. My anxiety grew with each passing set, my self-recrimination a bitter chorus in my head. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to run out of the gym and never come back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hour was up. Okay, that's it for today, he said, wiping down a bench with a disinfectant spray. Good work. It was the standard, generic sign-off. The death knell. I felt a cold wave of disappointment wash over me. It was over. I had imagined it all. Okay, I said, my voice hollow. Thanks. I turned to leave, my shoulders slumped in defeat. Leo, I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to see the pity on his face. I heard him take a step closer. Friday night, he said, his voice low and close to my ear. That wasn't a mistake. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees almost buckled. I slowly turned to face him. He was standing close, his expression serious. The professional mask was gone again, replaced by the earnest, open face I had seen in the parking lot. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I didn't want to push you. Here. I wasn't sure. He didn't know what I wanted. He was giving me an out. He was being careful with me. The realization was as stunning as the kiss itself. He was just as uncertain as I was. I found my voice, a fragile, hopeful thing. It wasn't a mistake for me, either. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, dazzling smile that reached his eyes and made my heart do a painful, joyous flip. Good, he said simply. That's good. The tension between us didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer the sharp, anxious hum of uncertainty. It became a warm, magnetic pull, a shared secret that glowed between us. I'm going for a hike on Sunday, he said, his tone deliberately casual, but his eyes were locked on mine. Up at Miller's Peak. If you're not busy. It wasn't a question. It was an offer. A chance to see who we were outside the walls of this gym, away from the weights and the mirrors. I'm not busy, I said, a smile of my own finally breaking free. Sunday was perfect. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. We didn't talk much at first, just fell into a comfortable rhythm, our footsteps a steady beat on the winding trail. It was different seeing him here. He was wearing hiking boots and a flannel shirt, and he looked even more at home here in the woods than he did in the gym. He looked free. As we climbed, the conversation started to flow, easy and natural. We talked about things that had nothing to do with fitness, books, terrible movies, childhood memories, the kind of small, essential details that build a bridge between two people. I found myself talking, really talking, without the constant filter of anxiety. He listened with the same focused intensity he applied to everything, making me feel like what I had to say was important. We reached the summit in the late afternoon. The view was breathtaking, the whole city spread out below us like a map. We sat on a large, sun-warmed granite boulder, shoulder to shoulder, sharing a water bottle. It's good to see you smile, he said quietly, looking at me. I realized it was true. I was smiling. A real, unforced smile that reached my eyes. You're the one who put it there, I admitted, the words feeling easy and true. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His calloused palm was warm and solid around my own. It wasn't a prelude to anything else. It was just a connection. A simple, profound statement. We are here. Together. We sat like that for a long time, in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The world below seemed distant and insignificant. The only thing that felt real was the solid weight of his hand in mine, the warmth of his shoulder pressed against me, and the quiet, steady presence of the man by my side. In that moment, I looked out at the sprawling view, and for the first time, I wasn't just an observer. I was part of the landscape. I felt the cool breeze on my skin. I heard the whisper of the wind in the pines. I felt the solid ground beneath me and the solid man beside me. My whole life, I had been looking away, staring at the ceiling, at the floor, at anything but the truth of myself. Alex hadn't fixed me. He had just done something infinitely more powerful. He had given me a better place to look. He had shown me that I didn't have to look at my own reflection to see that I was strong. I just had to look at him. And in his eyes, I was finally starting to see someone worth looking at. I was finally starting to feel like I had come home.